Welcome to this Think Small Cell webinar, Small Cells Going to Volume. I'm joined today by Simon Brown and Nick Johnson of ip.access, one of the world's leading small cell pioneers. And what we're going to be discussing today is what is it going to take to get small cells into that next phase of growth? Is it a technical or a business or other reasons? Now, the agenda for the event today is that, first of all, I'll just briefly recap some of the latest Yankee Group research, and then hand over to Nick and Simon in turn to build on that story and give their view of what's required to grow. We'll have a Q&A session at the end, but at any time during the webinar, you can submit a question for us, and we'll take those in turn during the Q&A session. Just use the panel on the right of your screen. So first, let me kick off with this review of the Yankee Group findings. The study was done by Ken Raban, one of Yankee Group's principal analysts and an expert in all aspects of radio access networks. And he was asked to assess the deployment status and explain and consider whether the concept of business case chaining is a good means to accelerate small cell deployment. And I'll explain what we mean by business case chaining in a moment. Now, perhaps the best way to do that is to compare it with a technical product or feature development, where it's quite common to try out maybe one or two different technical solutions, test that with not just in the lab, but with a small number of users before it's deployed more widely, and then get some feedback and understanding of how it performed. And of course, the same thing can be done with any business case or any market proposition, that you can test out a variety of different things, determine which ones are successful, revise and expand those which work well. And in doing so, you stimulate a virtuous cycle which will create and develop the business further. So what Ken found from discussing this with a number of operators around the world was that, well, there are some countries where that's not yet appropriate. And we're thinking here of countries which perhaps maybe don't have the wireline infrastructure or easy internet broadband access everywhere that would support a large number of small cells being deployed. But that's not the case in many developed countries. And this is where we find there's more organizational or institutional issues which are holding things back. Operators are still narrowly focused on this tactical response to coverage and capacity, and that's something that's typically retained within the operations or network planning departments. So what Ken recommended was that there needs to be some top-level executive commitment or sponsorship from the leadership level at the mobile network operator. And that would allow operators to think beyond this tactical convergence issue. It would involve the whole organization, whichever departments are required, and allow them to expand the small cell deployments, looking at a whole variety of different deployment scenarios, business cases, and allow the enterprise sales channels in particular to become more effective with greater tools, greater empowerment, greater opportunities. So in summary, he found that it's the operator's institutional inertia that's limiting the growth of small cells to their next phase. So having briefly set that scene, I'd now like to hand over to Nick Johnson, founder and CTO of ip.access, to build on that story. Over to you, Nick.
Thanks, David. So the slide is here talking about removing the roadblocks in terms of going to volume. So that's really the subject of our webinar today. My section of it really talking about the yin and the yang, if you like, of the deployment recipe, the minimizing of TCO and the maximizing of return on investment. I think everyone who's been involved in the small cell game has been very much focused on the network features and the radio features required to minimize the cost of ownership of a small cell network. What we've not really focused enough attention on so far is actually maximizing the return on that investment, what services and what revenue an operator can expect by deploying a small cell network, and how do their business processes really need to update themselves really to enable that return on investment. So we go to the next slide. Really, we're talking here, I think, about a change of direction, if you like. The focus, as I said, have been very much engineering-led focus, and having got to a certain level of maturity in that engineering, that network deployment, in terms of radio features and the small cell capabilities, done an amazing job of packing a huge amount of functionality into a very small form factor. Now changing the focus now to take that more towards a volume questions, which is really about process that sits around the product, and how do we ensure that we get to maximizing the return on that investment by maximizing the volume that we can deploy in a frictionless way. It's a kind of fashionable phrase at the moment, but actually making sure that the processes we deploy really allow the deployment of each additional small cell with the minimum cost, the minimum user intervention, the minimum network operator intervention, so that really the network can almost deploy itself. Forgive me the glibness of that phrase, but if we can achieve that goal, we're doing a good job. And then beyond that, really talking much more about the service to the customer. What is it we're actually, which customer are we focused on for a start, and what services are we interested in delivering to them? Is it voice? Is it just voice and capacity, voice and data, or is there something more to be done? And I think there is a definite shift towards a value in the network in terms of presence and location services, actually, especially in the small cell space. Small cells have an intrinsic ability to know where you are to a much finer grain of detail than the macro network, and actually turning that value into the value, turning that information into value is one of the key next steps, I think, in the small cell story. And enabling that to allow those right business processes, the ones that allow us to deploy the network with minimum friction, and the technical processes to go with that, altogether lowering the total cost of ownership. And that, in practical terms, means a range of features then that actually we have built into the solution, and that have evolved over time since we started doing this over 5 years ago now. The user plug and play, so something that's very well trialed now, very well, very robust, is actually that a user can pick up a small cell and plug it into a network, and it can connect back to a configuration server and bring itself into service very quickly. That OSS site add primitive that supports that is kind of crucial to that. And what's behind that is a feature that sits a little bit lower down the list, the template selection part of the equation, where actually the site you're adding to the network may be one of a range of canonical examples. If you do examples of, such as a warehouse, which may be large and empty, but still needs coverage, or it may be a coffee shop hotspot with high mobility, so people are moving in and out of it very quickly, but not necessarily carrying a lot of calls, or a hotspot with high persistence, where people are there's lots of people, but not moving very much, but making lots of calls over time. So lots of different ways of configuring your network, but automatically based on a template. You don't have to individually configure attributes to get the cell into operation, all contributing to the sort of so-called frictionless deployment of the small cell network. And then continuing on the list here, the site survey. So actually one of the key activities of the beginning of a small cell deployment, really, and this is not a per base station activity, but having done the initial network configuration, captured that in the CIQ, so-called the customer information questionnaire, which allows you then to build the network and scale it on a very firm basis of a network design that then the small cells can fit into very easily. Every small cell that we build, at least, carries a network listen feature, if you like, the femto scan, which measures the local radio conditions, and then it allows us then to automatically select a template, which we talked about earlier, and also connect up in terms of mobility, connect up the neighbor lists that the system needs to manage mobility in and out of the network, and in and out of the small cell network, but also within the small cell network as well, and making sure that mobility is done economically and you're not creating excessive signaling into the core network. And then a rather important but often forgotten aspect here is actually managing the inventory of your network, actually, so that you can tell how much of you have in stock, and as you need to add resources to that network over time. So all of those things supported by a series of features which need minimal operator intervention, and allows the solution to scale up very easily without having to scale up the staff to support it. Such a set of solution features then allows us to deliver that at scale with minimal overhead. And then that solution then fits within a range of solutions here in a small cells part of licensed radio small cells, part of a portfolio of solutions including Wi-Fi and DAS. Obviously, small cells have a history of increasing the spectral efficiency of networks, allowing you to serve hotspots within and not spots within networks. But also something that we haven't really mentioned on this slide, actually, but beyond the coverage and capacity proposition, you have the option of actually gathering data from your small cell network in terms of user mobility, even in idle mode, actually how people are moving around within the network. And actually that solution, that part of the solution then, is adding value to your network beyond the coverage and capacity propositions that we've been used to. Obviously, people are adding Wi-Fi to their networks very often. Wi-Fi in its existing incarnation in terms of 11N and 11AC struggles with hyperdense networks, very dense networks of hotspots in enterprises. It congests rather easily, and there are some features going into Wi-Fi to help alleviate that. But at the moment, it's a best effort coverage and offload solution at sort of medium capacity. And then for large estates where you've got a lot of ground to cover, where you need rather large coverage area but not much extra capacity, then distributed antenna systems and other solutions there to allow you to spread out the coverage that you're providing. And of course, that DAS can be fed from small cells as well as from macrocells. So that's where we fit within that range of solutions. And then bringing in the yin and the yang and the black and white aspects of reducing cost and reducing and increasing the business value of the small cell network, then really a set of balanced aspects to the whole thing. Actually, we talked a bit earlier about the network CIQ and the RF plan that goes, which actually is largely beyond the first setup, is largely automatically derived, balanced on the business side by new types of offer, as I mentioned, things such as business analytics that the small cell network can derive, template-driven automation, balanced with the revenue from the business model, if you like, created by your sponsor on the business side of the network, balancing the plug and play for the user, balancing that with an impact across the business, not just in one aspect. I think Simon will amplify this point later in his presentation. And the frictionless scaling, the repeatable network config, so you don't have to configure individual cells, of course, that's fundamental to the small cell proposition, leads to a very simplified, much simplified business process in terms of deployment, tracking the deployment, accounting for the deployment, and measuring its value. And then really focusing your customizations only when they're needed, allowing you really to energize your organization, really focus the energy of your organization where it's really needed, where it's adding the value, not in terms of the baseline basics coverage and capacity. You can focus the energy of your business where you really need to add value, not on the baseline deployment. And then the key measurement of that, all that, of course, your network performance from a technical point of view is measured in KPIs, and a small cell network needs to track a lot of those and derive the performance of the network, in a continuous basis. And we need to translate those KPIs then into the impact of the small cell network in dollars and cents, and that that really is the balancing aspect. At the end of the day, this needs to be a way of increasing the value of your network, but also reducing the operating cost of that network. Another way of expressing that is the so-called, which sort of leads into this business case chaining concept, is actually enabling the small cell network to start with, where you equip the data center with the gateways that you need, or the gateway that you need, because part of this proposition is that a single gateway can serve your small cell network, whether it's 2G, 3G, 4G, or even Wi-Fi, and then having enabled your network, then picking off the best formed opportunities there, and noting that a single base station solution, a single small cell solution, might serve 2 or 3 market opportunities, measuring the performance of those, and then adding to them in an opportunistic way to understand actually by deploying in additional vertical applications, then you're not having to re-equip your network. You can simply add small base stations, small cells to your network in a way which just adds minimal marginal cost, but brings a lot of additional value into that network. And then step and repeat. So this is by picking off the opportunities which work and stopping the ones that don't work, then you can expand your network in the places that add most value and derive most of the value from that initial investment. In real terms, so what does that mean in terms of the network itself? So here's a schematic of a small cell network, and we make, of course, all of the access devices, all the small cells, the gateways, and the management system as well that goes with it. So a complete RAN solution, and that, and then if we by small cell enabling, that means equipping the data center then with that gateway and management system, then, which really enables then any mix of deployments of small cells, 3G, 4G, Wi-Fi, even 2G, still quite a significant business in part of the world, and in lots of different application spaces, large buildings, public access, VIPs, of course, which are very important to keep them happy, and small businesses, SME, and small office, home office. So all of those applications served by all of these diverse small cell solutions. And then on to the next slide. Here we are, have an audience poll.
That's right. Thanks very much, Nick. So it's time for the audience just to see whether, having heard what you've heard so far, whether you believe that small cells do have a valuable role to play in mobile national infrastructure. So just select one of the above. I think we've got a very positive view so far. So just close the polling in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Thanks. Right, and as you can see on your screens now, 83% are very strongly in favor of small cells, which is good to hear, and really very small percentage not seeing any role. But overall,
Excellent.
very positive.
My work is done.
I think you've definitely done a good job there. So with that in mind, time to hand over to our next speaker, Simon Brown, CEO of ip.access.
Thanks, David. So I'm Simon Brown. I'm the Chief Executive of ip.access. So if we take, build on the building blocks from what Nick has been saying here, and sort of cast that forward, essentially then, if you look at utilizing this technology in the real world, you essentially have, and we're back to the yin and yang theme here again, two aspects or two ways of looking at this going forward. Traditionally and very obviously, there's the network engineering-led prioritization where fundamentally you look at new technology to enhance or expand existing capability, in this case the mobile network, whether it's to plug holes, fix known problems, hotspots and so on, whether it's to add additional deployment capability, or essentially literally providing enhanced network capability. But it's all about the technology. And so understandably and reasonably there's a lot of effort that goes into ensuring that any new technology does have a role to play within a network. But at the same time, there is another angle, and I guess one of the things that we're observing is some of the operators who've been dealing with the technology for some time are now beginning to extend their thinking beyond purely the network side, and in theory you could actually say this is the cost side of the equation, into customer-led, market-led activities, looking or searching for revenue enablement, building new services, driving new business, looking at creating new services. Effectively, as we say here, how can the network do more good? What do you do with this? So moving from pure cost-saving or problem-solving orientation towards revenue generation. I actually had a great experience, I guess, a couple of months back, where I was talking to one network executive who literally, these guys had moved from the pure engineering side of things to the customer side, and this was an individual who had a multi-billion-dollar revenue target for his company, his network, and he was literally working through that. Okay, what can I do with this? I can do that. That's so cool. This will enable me to do this, and it was literally several hours of an individual realizing what he actually had in his network, and lining up individual revenue opportunities based on his capability. It was quite a positive and, I guess, enlightening sort of session that we had, and this was the point, that the leading guys are beginning to think more about how I exploit what I've got, my capability, to generate new opportunity for the company. And so if we sort of take that forward one step and then look at what does this mean in terms of volume and deployment and that side of things, you start off naturally and very logically with what we've termed here the first phase, or the technology phase, where you look at the capabilities and the opportunities that the technology provide you as a company. How do you actually get it in? How do you deploy various pilots and so on? The next phase, generally, as you begin to deploy a little bit more widely, is then, well, how do I, as a company, literally standardize the usage of this new capability or new infrastructure or technology, and how do I structure my company and its activities around what's going on here? And there's a learning and educational process, if you like, that flows on from that. And then what we observe is, I guess, once you get those two things bedded in, then simply you copy paste, you repeat again and again and again, you tune, you make more efficient, and you literally then begin to cater for accelerating demand and basically generate significant amount of revenue. And so this is, I guess it's fairly standard, it's fairly straightforward, but this is the volume maturity curve that we all know and love, and that's at play every day in mobile operating networks around the world. If we then look at the impact of that, or the obvious conclusion of that in terms of small cell technology, what we're saying then in the next slide is that as you step from pure technology deployment and pure technology exploitation and really begin to build real business opportunity and revenue generating examples from this, you end up with what is a fairly significant cross business activity going on. You have various business owners involved, you have marketing teams involved, you have your order and procurement activities underway, you have indoor RF planning, network operations, IP engineering, core engineering, support CRM, and so on, and the list goes on and on and on. And in fact, another industry exec did say to me a while back, for every small cell I deploy, I have to involve 17 departments. So it's quite a heavy duty exercise in some ways if you're not careful to deploy these things. So ironically, you're looking at something with a capex of a handset, but the opex of a macro site if you're not careful. And this is the point. We have technology here that can be agile, fast, dynamic, if you like, in terms of its deployment. We need to make sure that we coordinate multiple departments and end up with an activity that is similarly light. If not, we destroy the opportunity or the potential of a new business case, if you like, or new business model. And our observation, back to this point again, our observation is that some of the more experienced or longer playing mobile operators who've been dealing with small cells have actually crossed across this and recognized that this is absolutely critical to exploiting the new technology. So if we look at what's going on then and how some of these guys are dealing with this and how we're seeing things develop, you end up, because of the multi-business impact, you end up with simply the requirement for an executive sponsor to be involved in the overall coordination of the activity, who then pulls together the activities of the multiple departments. Once again, this isn't rocket science, but it's surprising the number of people who don't step naturally towards that. Let's put it this way. It's important at the outset to begin to think in this way, because to fully exploit what you have at your disposal, you will need to coordinate the activity of multiple departments. And that's what the guys who are beginning to go to volume and really get benefit from this technology are beginning to do. What we also find is that customer-driven examples, customer-driven business cases, are the examples and the activities that are best coordinating the activities of the multiple departments, because functionally there is revenue involved. It is revenue driven, and that revenue driving focus is what's coordinating the multiple business owners to align and get moving. So if we look at some of the complexity, it doesn't take much imagination to realize that suddenly this, if you're not careful, this can get pretty complex. So you do have end customers, you do have to coordinate order activity, possible site server activity if that's required in enterprise cases, fault management, fault dealing, if you like, through support organizations. You have an overall business owner who needs to coordinate the service offering, measure performance characteristics in terms of commercial return and so on. And then, of course, you need the marketing guys to be pushing all the right hot buttons to get this out there. And you need the processes between each of these guys to be aligned and set up, ideally up front. So when you get to this sort of level, this is no longer an engineering exercise. It's no longer an engineering play toy that's put in place to explore or investigate new technology. It is actually a full business coordination that is driving revenue and utilizing the technology to enable that revenue. And once again, this is what the leading guys are really beginning to do right now and do with success. If we then look at examples, do you need new skill sets? Do you need new capabilities within the organization? One of the things we're discovering as we work forward is that generally speaking, most of the skills and most of the talent that you need, or even the tools and capability, often exists within the operator environment. So, for example, if you look at high mass deployment of cell sites, if you look at it from a pure macro perspective, you can very easily reach the conclusion that this is a very complex thing when I'm used to deploying hundreds or maybe 1,000 macro sites in a year to then go to orders of magnitude more, it becomes almost a scary proposition. However, if you look at it from a different perspective, if you actually deploy millions of handsets a year, deploying a few tens of thousands of sites actually becomes quite a simple exercise. And so, for example, some people have really begun to say, all right, well, if I deploy small cells as I would provision and activate a handset, then suddenly I have an already defined process that I can exploit with some slight adjustments to deploy high volumes of new cells into the right place. And so what we're seeing is some of the leading luminaries, if you like, beginning to exploit existing processes within their organization to enable the acceleration of coverage capacity and other vertical business ideas into the network quite easily. So it's not about necessarily new skill sets, it's just about rethinking the problem and coming at it from a slightly different perspective. If we then sort of roll that one step forward, and we even take an example from the DSL industry, what you're effectively trying to do is draw a straight line between the initial marketing concept through to eventual service support. You want to create a cross-business approach that is fairly automated, fairly straightforward, that goes from the initial proposition through to a customer order, through to cell order management, and then simple deployment and support, utilizing existing process where it is there as effectively as possible. Like I said, you may need to plug these processes differently together, but often they are actually in place within the operator community. And as we see, once again, some of the leading guys are doing exactly this. They're not reinventing the wheel, they're just putting on the car in a slightly different way. So fundamentally, what we're seeing then is an adjustment in perspective, if you like, or a slight rethinking about the way in which process and practice is being utilized to roll out new service. It's starting with a service orientation. I want to provide this to my customers, and this is the best way to do it. So we see a slightly change in orientation towards business focus. We see the orientation towards customers. What do my customers want? They want the following. We then adjust the processes that we have behind the scenes, and we look at the portfolio of products we have to meet that market requirement, and then off we go. And we deliver in a volume more like a handset. And like I said, there are a number of guys out there who are literally moving across this sort of transformation. And as you step, literally what was a cumbersome or difficult process actually becomes, to use the word Nick used earlier, a fairly frictionless process, and new markets and customers are addressed quickly, revenue is built fast, and customer satisfaction goes up. So that's effectively what we see going on, and I guess what we have been sharing with our new customers around the world.
Thanks very much indeed, Simon. Before we go on to the Q&A session, just going to have another quick poll, and that should come up on your screen now. So what we're asking is, do you see vertical service offerings supported by small cells other than just coverage and capacity? Thanks. The votes are coming in, so I'll just ask you to vote if you haven't already. Most people have. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Great, thanks. And as you can see on the screen, not quite as positive perhaps as the first poll that we had, but certainly almost half the audience today think that's probably the case, and relatively few don't see any chance of that, although there's still some uncertainty, and a good third most definitely see some opportunity there. So with that over, moving on to the Q&A session, I have had a few questions submitted during the event itself, and perhaps we could just start with those. But meanwhile, if you do have any questions for Nick or Simon, please just submit them on the panel on the right-hand side of your screen. So there's a couple of people have asked whether you call it neutral host or multi-operator versus single operator is just terminology really, but it's often quite an important topic that we've seen and a significant differentiator for DAS systems. I just wonder if Simon or Nick, you'd care to comment on how important that neutral host or multi-operator aspect is.
Yeah, this is Nick. I'll pick this one up. I think there's a couple of factors here. One is actually who your customer is. If the guy who's buying the network, installing, developing, wants to earn money from the network, if that entity, if that person is the operator, then actually they're interested in serving their own customers to the preference of their competitors. And certainly for small scale, for small to medium scale deployments, then you're going to go a small cell route. If the person buying the network is actually a building owner or shopping mall or airport or whatever, then they're much more interested in providing a level playing field for all of the operators and all of their customers. And so very often they will opt for DAS. But I think is well known that DAS comes with a fairly high initial cost in terms of installation, and so generally speaking, those DAS systems live in a quarter, in the quarter of the quadrant that is high value, large systems where the building owner is the prime mover, if you like, of the solution. For the rest, the other three quadrants, small cells with operator involvement tends to be the norm.
Thanks, Nick. The other question we've had relates to whether it's 3G or 4G or ideally multi-mode small cells. Particularly with some of the new products allegedly just around the corner that do all these technologies. Do you see that would have a significant impact on this strategy?
Well, I think I don't think it affects the strategy. I think the point is that that these multi-mode, multi-standard cells may be around the corner, but they don't actually change the argument. The point is to derive value from your network, and you can derive that from the 3G and Wi-Fi solutions that you have out there at the moment. And there's no need to wait for a combined cell to do that. Once you've small cell enabled your network, then adding an LTE cell or a multi-standard cell onto the edge of that network to add more value is a marginal cost that will drive extra revenue. But don't wait. There's no need to wait. It doesn't change the equation at all.
Right. Sorry, just a couple more questions coming in, so keep them coming. One from audience asking about geolocation solutions. How important is it to first of all be able to position the small cells in the right place, which may be a scalable thing or not, and secondly, selling or using that location information from exactly where the consumers are.
Yeah, so Simon here. So two elements there. How important is it to understand where the cell is? I guess it depends then clearly on the nature of the service. If it's residential or general capacity coverage type service play, then the absolute location of the cell is not quite so important, other than it does provide adequate coverage and capacity and so on. So in that sense, these things can go quite smoothly where you need them to provide those general sort of services. But it is an interesting question that it does open up a very interesting vertical, which is the one that is aligned with, and there's many words to describe this, presence, geolocation, whatever. And there are a number of interesting, should we say, business cases, revenue streams that are beginning to develop around using small cells to provide location information. Given the inherent nature of the small cell, that it does provide a specific area of coverage, you do then very, very accurately understand, you know, where users are and what they're doing, and that has a utilization across a whole bunch of different industries. So in that case, yes, you do need to know where the small cell is and where it is located, relative to the, I guess, the business function you're serving, if you like, and then you can use that information to generate, develop additional revenue streams, and they can be quite valuable. I mean, this in some ways is the Google Analytics of the real world. You know, you're talking about, you know, who's doing what, and you know, where are they? Whether it's, you know, are people looking at my, you know, multimedia billboard, or people going into certain shops, or you know, what's the footfall there, and so on. So you can, or you know, is someone there, and should I offer them a voucher to come in and shop in my store? So there are a whole bunch of additional revenue streams that are potentially enabled by using presence data from small cells, that can be exceptionally valuable.
Thanks, Simon. I have to say, I was quite surprised when you mentioned earlier in the presentation about 17 departments being needed to be involved for enabling and deploying a macro cell. So the question is really how ready are operators' deployment processes to adapt and scale up to these large number of small cell installations? You know, they can't just hand it over to the people who do the handset stuff. You know, how can they cope with it?
Yeah, it's a good point, and you know, it was a telling example, and a real example, and you know, notwithstanding that, the operator concerned have deployed, you know, a large number of cells, so they do make it work. So the answer is, or you know, in thinking through this, this is still, you know, a device that goes into a mobile phone network. So you know, no one here is saying that you need to, you know, undercook or play less emphasis on the engineering aspects of the technology. It does need to perform and integrate smoothly with the mobile phone network. But what we are saying is that, you know, even if there are, for example, you know, 15, 20 departments involved, what you need is a fairly straightforward process between each of them to allow this to move smoothly and efficiently. So the two elements to the answer is, one, yes, you know, in cases you may need lots of departments, so you have to look at the process that you're exploiting to let it happen quickly, and as light touch as possible. But in some cases, it may well simply be that the processes that were developed to deploy a macro site simply do not cope with a small cell deployment. I think one of the examples used in one of the conferences recently was, you know, someone saying literally that their system only allows them to deploy a site at a postcode, an address, and of course that's fine for a macro cell, but it's not quite so fine for a small cell where you may want to stick it on a lamppost or a power pole or something. So you know, there are tangible examples of limitations of, you know, macro-oriented deployment that need to be modified to take care of the more granular nature of the small cell.
Thanks, Simon. And moving away from some of these technical questions, I see one asking, you know, is there any low-hanging fruit in some services or vertical market sectors which might be, you know, more attractive or more easily addressed early on in this evolution?
Yes, Simon, yet again. I think there is lots of low-hanging fruit. I think it varies depending on the operator, the location, the region, and so on. I mean, the obvious early entry points are using small cells to cost effectively pick up, you know, areas of high traffic or high density. You know, as the old macro guys know very, very well, every time you turn on a macro where there is, you know, heavy traffic, you're generating revenue immediately. So using the small cell to provide perfect coverage, if you like, in a cost-effective way is always, you know, an easy piece of low-hanging fruit. Like I said, some other leading operators are looking at right now is, all right, well, if we've got these cells in place doing this, can I then utilize them to provide additional services like presence, location data, to build additional revenue streams over and above my traditional voice and data traffic? And so they're using, for example, the existing cell location to then provide a second or third revenue stream quite quickly. In some cases, they're then taking that concept and saying, well, actually, the low-hanging fruit is to provide small cells to provide that sort of data to that sector of the marketplace. And is then taking the whole concept one step further once they've generated their basic capability. So, yep, low-hanging fruit. Hotels, conference centres, train stations, all these sort of things are regularly used to get initial coverage capacity in place, and then you can utilise these to provide higher value-added services afterwards.
Thanks, Simon. We've got quite an attentive audience, and they're quite challenging. And I've had a couple of responses while you've been speaking, actually. Really asking what are these revenue streams? Who's actually going to pay for it, other than just some analytics or some reports? Where is the money going to come from?
So I guess it depends on the specific service that's being adopted. Am I suggesting you just go and pepper the world with these things and then hope the world comes to you? No. In the case of coverage capacity, I think it's fairly straightforward. You look at your network design, look at where the customers are demanding service, and then utilize the technology accordingly. So that's fairly straightforward. What we have in other cases are specific projects where specific carriers have understood a need or a demand for data from the network, and therefore forming relationships and agreements with third parties who will actually acquire this data. And then once those are in place, then they're looking at I guess presence capability to provide those third parties with the data they're requesting. So there are tangible, real cases that are beginning to stack up out there where this is happening. The other one is vouchers. Mobile carriers working with third parties, with retail outlets, looking at providing mobile vouchers for retail use. These are real cases. Clearly, I can't mention the names of the individual operators or the names of the third parties for confidentiality reasons, but it is going on right now. I guess if anyone wants to talk to us directly, we can help them with what's going on.
Thanks. No, it's quite a diverse area, as you've said. There's no single answer to that. So just moving quickly on to the next question. It's more of a technical one, so perhaps for Nick, and it's about SON, self-organizing networks. How important is that, and how mature is it as part of this deployment and acceleration of small cells?
Yeah, it's a good question, and SON is it's a live area. I mean, we've solved a lot of the early problems, and certainly the lessons of residential femto that we learnt a few years ago now, and they're mostly SON features hosted in the base station, where the device is setting itself up in terms of its neighbor relationships and so on, and mobility in and out of the small cell layer. Those things were developed as part of that residential femto deployment. Since that kind of developed, then of course we have the more centralized SON aspects, using network APIs as a way of updating network configuration has become a live issue, and there are some key companies in that space as well, and we provide a sort of mediation into that kind of solution through our network management solution. So there is a balance of the basics in terms of network carrier frequency selection, scrambling code selection, and neighbor cell relationship and power settings and threshold settings, which are more or less done. I think there are still questions around and mobility within the small cell layer. I think there are still in 3G at least, there is still the question, or the pre-release 9 3G at least, there is still the question of handover into the small cell layer. There are 2 or 3 pre-standard solutions out there, and we look forward to that reaching a standardized solution in due course, and I think that in some ways will complete the issue. I think one of the issues with SON at the moment, one that's live, is the question of capacity. Very often, by introducing a cell into a network, you actually enable a lot of new traffic. And I think, as Simon said, one of the of course, that's one of the sources of new revenue, of course, is that you're allowing calls to complete where they didn't used to complete, and you're allowing data to flow where it didn't used to flow, and flow faster than it used to. And sometimes that, if you're not careful with your network design, then that can drive congestion. And actually, paradoxically enough, you put in a small cell to relieve or improve network performance, and you can introduce congestion if you don't get it right. So actually making sure that you introduce the right capacity of device into the network is very important. And sometimes you don't know that in advance, because it might be in a not spot or a hot spot where the actual demand is uncertain. So having the SON features in there to allow you to identify those that extra demand, and allowing you to the whole business process to make sure that the right level of capacity is installed at the moment, then kind of on the edge of SON, but I think that's one of the live issues at the moment, is actually making sure that when you do introduce your new small cell network, it has the capacity to improve your value. And that's the solution. That's a problem that we've pretty much solved, but it's probably the latest one in the list of SON, especially distributed SON features that we have. I think it will continue to be, new issues will continue to arise. I think the goal of the frictionless deployment, I think that's someone wrote a book about that a little while ago, didn't they? But we wrote the book. I think that's each time we solve a problem, it is at one level that the layers of the onion. You find another problem lurking underneath, and you get to another order of magnitude. Your network quality gets to 99%, 99.5%, 99.9%, 99.99%, and each time you're solving a harder problem over a smaller number of problem cases. But that's the sort of mission we're on, and SON actually has a very key part in solving that.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at SON, presumably most people are considering optimizing the network and making it work more efficiently and increasing the coverage, as the sort of SON vendors typically tell you. You can get more performance, but for me, the factors would be it enables this rapid deployment, that you can literally turn on a switch on a small cell and it just works. You don't need a whole team of people to configure it. One of the other questions was about integrating with the macro cell network, and that happens pretty much automatically as well. So I guess those are the two significant enablers. Anyway, I shouldn't be trying to answer questions for you. I think that just about brings us up to time. So before I ask our panelists just to share some closing thoughts, I'll just direct you first of all to the thinksmallcell.com website, where you can download the Yankee research note. You can sign up for our free monthly newsletter if you haven't already, and you can watch other webinars in our series. If you'd like to meet or talk with Simon and Nick, they'll be at Mobile World Congress, which is the last week of February, the 24th to 27th in Barcelona. And as you can see on the diagram, they'll be there in Hall 7. So do look them up. But just as part of our close, I'd like to hand over to Nick and Simon in turn, just for some closing thoughts. Nick.
Thanks, David. Well, thanks everyone for your attention and some probing questions. I hope I went some way to answering some of them. But as David said, by all means reach out directly and challenge us more closely. Look forward to seeing some of you at Barcelona and continuing the development of the small cell market. I think there's still, I think we still believe that the small cells are the only way to solve the capacity and value questions that are challenging mobile operators today, and we look forward to meeting that challenge and solving those problems.
Thanks, Nick. Simon?
Yeah, thanks, David. So building on what Nick says, I think we've got to a situation where we have good, solid underlying technology here that is integrating well into mobile networks. And certainly from our perspective, we're now engaged with a number of players in the marketplace with some very innovative and very exciting developments in taking service cases forward. As operators really begin to look towards market and customer-driven activities, and I think some of these cases will transform the industry both in terms of its capability and its outlook, but also in terms of its economics and the ability for mobile operators to utilize infrastructure and existing capabilities to add further revenue cases to further improve their financial operation. So I think there are a lot of really cool things going on. We're engaged in many of them, and it'd be good to talk to people about that in Barcelona.
Great. I'm sure your stand at Barcelona will be very busy. So as we said, it's Hall 7, C60. Thanks very much to everybody for listening to this webinar. And tomorrow you should get an email follow-up with some of the links to the various content and slides that have been presented today. Thanks very much.